It's time for the main event of the evening. Lightweights on the marquee. We have Grant Dawson in his first 5-round fight as a professional fighter. He's going to be taking on King Bobby Green. And Matt, I started off the show, I'm wearing, in memory, a Tim Wakefield shirt. He was my favorite pitcher for the Red Sox. He sadly passed away this weekend from brain cancer. And there's an old quotable from a Pittsburgh Pirates player named Richie Hebner. And he said, trying to hit a knuckleball was kind of like trying to eat soup with a fork. And when you watch Bobby Green fight, to make the connection, those odd angle punches and those really low arms,
he makes wrong look right.
Such an unorthodox look at lightweight. And for a guy like Grant Dawson, when you consider a matchup like this, Dawson's fought strikers in the past. You think of the issues that he had in the third round against a guy who's on this card. There's so many Spider-Man memes that we could have. From Green fighting Drew Dober in the past. From Grant Dawson fighting a guy like Rick Glenn. Dawson wasn't able to get out of those bad positions. He was willing to accept the back, and he was willing to accept a little bit of damage. But you look at a guy like Dawson in his last matchup, taking on a guy like Damir Ismagulov, and everybody thought that Ismagulov was going to win that fight. Matt, 12 minutes and 24 seconds of control time
pretty
later,
wild,
3:30:27. Dawson's beating Ismagulov. He wants to fight ranked fighters next. Dawson gets that number 10 ranking, and all of a sudden, hey, good performance. Fight guys outside of the rankings now. So he gets an opportunity to take on a name that fight fans know and ultimately love in King Bobby Green. Now, the record might be salty at 30-14-1 with a no contest, but for Bobby Green, his last time out, he beat the former interim champ Tony Ferguson. And listen, this is where I know what you guys are thinking. All right. So at 2 minutes and 31 seconds off a straight right, Tony Ferguson knocks down Bobby Green. It's an uncredited knockdown, but Bobby Green got knocked down.
Heavens to Betsy, I didn't know those existed.
I told you it was coming back. 20 seconds later, Bobby Green posts out, and that finger's in the eye.
Oh, yeah.
And Tony Ferguson had to blink it out. And as the first round wore on, Bobby Green found himself into the fight. He was able to land more shots, second round, and then into the third round. They're in tight. The fight goes down to the mat. How does it get down there? Tony goes Granby roll like he used to, but it was almost at half speed. Bobby Green ends up on top, and the guard, Tony's got a good guard.
It's like Dave Parker playing for the Angels.
But then Bobby Green was able to go out there and get the head and arm choke. Now, Joe Rogan on the call. Very surprised Bobby Green had a submission win. That was Bobby Green's 9th submission win, but it's obviously not the biggest part of his game. And we remember Bobby Green fights for the two fight of the nights against Lando Venata. We remember him for maybe a knockout loss to Dustin Poirier. Green's lost to the very good fighters.
He got kicked by Edson. That was
He
fun.
did. But he's beaten the good fighters and the outside of the top 15 fighters as well. So for Green, it's going to be an interesting matchup because stylistically and traditionally, 74% takedown defense in the UFC. And if Bobby Green can shuck those underhooks, and if he can get you to play on the outside, even though Grant Dawson looked good against Ismagulov, even though Grant Dawson looked good against Leo Santos, my guy, his striking's come a long way since he's moved from Middle America to American Top Team down in Florida. Grant Dawson is not to the level of a striker like Bobby Green. So it's going to be imperative, obviously, you know this, for Bobby to defend takedowns, for Grant to be able to go out there and get them early and often. But if we end up in a situation, notwithstanding an injury like last weekend, to where Bobby Green does the facade on the outside and Gamrot can't get the takedowns, a teammate of Grant Dawson, then it could be a strange brew for Grant Dawson in the matchup.
It could be, but the only thing where I'm going to zag a little bit is, even if he does go 1 for 7, 2 for 13, let's say, the 2 takedowns he gets might be worth 7.5 minutes of top control, and I do think that's going to be able to outweigh some of the work Bobby Green's able to do on the feet, because I do agree with you. Stylistically, Green has everything in his pocket to go out there and get the win. He strikes very well from long distance. He does a great job at digging for underhooks. He's an active fighter off his back too, not in terms of submissions, but he does work really hard to get back up to his feet, and all those things are important to try to tire Grant Dawson out so he can't shoot for that really high volume of takedowns. But Dawson is a very heavy fighter in that top position, can do good ground and pound, and he's always looking for his own submissions. And if Green does get a little bit irresponsible, trying to get back up to his feet, trying to wiggle around, I could see Dawson just continuously advancing in positions, getting more and more favorable, and then starting to maybe even get a finish via submission. Because for Green, I do think he's going to be able to withstand 25 minutes. And here is the question that I kind of posed for you. Who do you think has the bigger advantage by this being 5 rounds? Because I do see a world where both guys can get the advantage. If Dawson can get early takedowns and really tire Green out trying to get back up to his his feet, then Dawson should be able to just have more and more success as this fight continues. But on the flip side, if Green can force out some really just poor takedown attempts from Grant Dawson at long range, maybe on the flip side, Dawson gets tired, just doesn't look like himself in the 4th and 5th.
Whose sword is sharper in their own discipline? I mean, for Dawson, you talk about the wrestling. It got him to the top of the heap outside of the UFC. He wins on Contender Series. He makes his way up the chain. And you look at his Instagram, the guys that he's training with, I'll throw a picture up there. One of Matt's favorite fighters.
How many do I have?
One of my favorite
You've
fighters.
You've said this 11 times.
That couldn't get it going in the UFC, and it pains me because I like the guy. Harry Bush, Dakota Bush. That's a guy that you're going to work your wrestling with, and you're going to try and work your cardio for 5 rounds. Grant Dawson also training for this one with Thiago Moises. So the game plan,
a pretty good guy,
in all of his pictures, and it kind of gives it away, is to work the takedowns, get it down to the mat. When I look at Dawson struggling to get takedowns, I think all the way back to that Nad Narimani fight, where you're getting in tight. What was Grant Dawson's hallmark before the UFC and on the early rise to the UFC when he fought out of, again, Kansas City area? Get in tight, try and clinch, get the single leg, go high crotch single leg, get the takedown. Like Jordan Levitt does and like Claudio Poyes do in the lightweight division. That's what Grant Dawson used to do. He switched it up a little bit against Ismagulov. He was more dynamic, and he was very, very smothering with his game plan against a tricky fighter in Damir Ismagulov, if I can say that. With Bobby Green, I mean, I think the striking is a lot better than Grant Dawson.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Worlds apart. I think Green's, sword being sharp, I think it's sharper with his striking than Grant Dawson's is with his takedowns. The thing that I worry about in this one, though, Bobby Green, abbreviated, 9 days he gets a main event call against Islam Makhachev, who becomes a champ. Green gets taken down quick, and he ultimately gets submitted in the first round against Makhachev. Listen, water off a duck's back. It's almost like it didn't even happen. You could blindfold me, spin me around 10 times, and maybe I forget it even happened. It just eliminated from my brain that way. But for Grant Dawson, I will always have the lasting images from his 4th to last fight when he took on Rick Glenn. And in that 3rd round, it was over. It was over. He couldn't get out of his bottom position. He was too content with being on his back, and he got hit by a lot of unanswered shots from Glenn. Now, I know it's a draw, and it's a 10-8 3rd round majority of it. But for Dawson, I mean, he can struggle in some of these ranges, and we saw an improved gas tank his last time out when he took on Ismagulov, but it was only over 3 rounds. I'm not trying to understand an Ismagulov. I thought Ismagulov was going to end up in the top 5 at a point. I honestly did. That proved to me a lot out of Dawson's last performance. But Bobby Green, again, good takedown defense. He's working his jiu-jitsu down in Southern California for this one. I'll throw a picture up there for that one where I blurred out his 2 middle fingers to the camera. Listen, we try and keep it PG, but I swore earlier on in the show. I'll admit it. So when we look at this one, Matt, Grant Dawson, another one of these big favorites on the main card. He's a much younger party of these two. We have a look at the Tapology votes. Oh, wait. It's main event. We'll throw it out there too. The YouTube community tab. You guys voted. I'm going to update the numbers. But by and large, you folks, with 1,100 votes today, 78% with Grant Dawson. A little bit of a skirmish down there in the comments section between First Class and Fight Hive. First Class did not like the Bobby Green eye poke early on in that first round. Murab, 135-pound champ, is not a fan
Tony
of the card.
poked RDA in the eye?
I do. Gabriel Lopez saying, Grant Dawson gets him to the mat early and often, in my opinion. Showcase fight for him. And Chandler Witt, who's always out there every single week in the comments, saying Bobby Green struggled in moments against this version of Tony Ferguson. Bobby Green has 1 knockout since 2013. It was when Alhassan gave up. He has no path to victory, not to mention the 8-year age gap. He caught Alhassan coming in with that shot. Al reaches down for the takedown, and then he just lands those ground and pounded blows. And that was the end of it. So, Matt, I'm eager to get your take on who you have in this matchup, because this is the most Clash of Styles fight on this card.
Oh, without a doubt. If Bobby Green wins, it's just because of his striking. He's not going to get a submission off his back. I doubt he submits Grant Dawson. I know he does have the ability in his game. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan and say he doesn't have it. But I just think Grant Dawson from that top position has a little bit more to offer than Tony Ferguson at this stage of his career. Shout out Tony. A much better fighter overall. But again, you're not in your prime for your whole entire career, unless you're Barry Bonds. But he had a little bit of help at the end. My point is, and I brought it up earlier, even if Grant Dawson is on the receiving end of some of those shots at long distance from Bobby Green, I do think one well-timed takedown with a lot of top control is going to be able to outweigh some of the success Green is able to do on the feet. I worry a little bit about the 4th and 5th round, but I've kind of argued both ways for it, and I've gone back and forth in my own head. I think if Dawson's able to get a lot of early takedowns, I do think Green's going to be really tired in those last rounds and not be as dynamic on the feet to make him much more available for the takedown attempts of Dawson. So for those reasons, I have Grant Dawson, but I wouldn't be surprised. Bobby Green is one of those weird fighters who's had like 6 primes, right? Like every single time you count him out, he just comes back and goes on a bit of a run. He's always had that ability to, because Bobby Green's been counted out. It seems like every 2 years he suffers a couple losses and it's like, oh, that's kind of it for Bobby Green. And then he goes on, like I said, a bit of a run. So I wouldn't be surprised if Green got the win, but I do have Grant Dawson.
Green's loss is Dober, where he's beating him in the first round, beating him in the second round, gets hit by that big shot, and then he's out. Islam Makhachev. He also has lost to Fiziev, Moises, Trinaldo, Drakkar Klose, Rashid Magomedov, who couldn't get the takedowns in that one. I know it's a split decision, but yeah, Rashid couldn't get the takedowns. Poirier and Edson Barboza. Top flight competition. Bobby Green way back when, beating one half of a podcast with Big John McCarthy. I'm talking Josh Thompson.
Do you think Bobby Green's going to have a Tim Duncan 2014 performance?
No, I don't. I'm going to go with Grant Dawson. Honestly, like for everybody that's watching out there, we're getting close to the end of the year. I think we're separated by 1 pick right now. I kind of wanted to go over the top rope and take Bobby Green, but I do have Grant Dawson. I don't like the cardio. It's always going to give me question marks. But
for sure.
The takedowns that he was able to get against Ismagulov really did surprise me. And for Bobby Green, his takedown defense is great. I referenced that Magomedov fight for a reason. Haven't gone back and watched that one today. But for me, I do think Grant Dawson can get it done. So we are in agreement there. But we do have a lot of big-time fights. There's 12 on this card. We've been treated to some of these Apex cards that have been a little bit less than. But when you look at this and you try and paint it through a lens, there's no rookies. There's one sophomore showing, and that's Matheus Mendonca. So that's an exciting fight that he has upcoming against Nate Maness at a new weight class, 125. A lot of people that you know and love, with only 3 ranked fighters on the card. And you know here with Fight Night Picks, we got you covered. So if anything changes, X at Fight Night Picks, Instagram, same handle as well. You can find us here on YouTube. If there's anything that changes, we will update those videos. So make sure you toss a like on your way out. And if you're not subscribed, because there are a fair amount of you that aren't, toss that up there as we move forward. Matt, what's your favorite fight on this card before we leave the people packing?
I like Bill Algeo versus Alexander Hernandez, oddly enough. I just think it's a fight where both guys have fought some pretty big names, right? So you wonder about how many more opportunities they're going to have as some of those bigger names in the division, because if they lose, then they themselves are just going to be that big name kind of coming down in the division, and they're probably going to have to fight a really high-level prospect next. So for me, I think that's an oddly fun fight at 145.
I think Montel Jackson goes out there and just flexes that giant reach, and he just goes out there and makes it a fun one against Chris Gutierrez. I think that's an awesome fight, just buried on the prelims. So if you haven't checked out those videos, make sure you do. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it.